But we begin with the war between Russia and Ukraine. Moscow is accusing Kyiv of attacking a fuel depot in Belgorod.
As the war rages on between the two countries, Russia has blamed Ukrainian drone attacks for a fire at a nuclear power plant.
It's coming in showing Ukraine's bold drone strike on Russian aircraft. This is 2,800 miles from Ukraine's border.
Something big has shifted in the war between Russia and Ukraine, and the Kremlin is scrambling to respond. For 3 years, experts predicted Russia's economic collapse would end this conflict. However, Russia kept finding ways to push forward, burning through reserves and printing money to fund its invasion. But now, Ukraine has identified the exact pressure point that's making Putin's entire war machine crumble. They're targeting Russian energy infrastructure with surgical precision, hitting the same facilities over and over, and the economic damage is spiraling out of control. The results are undeniable. The panic in Moscow is real, and the timeline for Russia's collapse is accelerating faster than anyone anticipated. So, could this strategy actually bring an end to the war? Or will Putin keep finding new ways to keep the war going? In this video, we will break down how Ukraine's energy strikes are dismantling Russia's economy, exposing Putin's vulnerabilities, and accelerating a collapse that might change the course of this entire conflict. Ukraine has fundamentally changed how this war is being fought, and Russia never saw it coming. In recent months, Ukrainian forces have launched systematic strikes against Russian energy infrastructure on a scale that's creating permanent economic damage. We're not talking about occasional symbolic attacks anymore. Ukraine is hitting oil refineries, power plants, electrical substations, and fuel depots repeatedly, often targeting the same facilities multiple times until they're completely non-operational. The scope of this campaign is staggering. In just 1 month this year, Ukrainian drones struck at least 10 major Russian energy facilities. One of the most significant attacks targeted an energy complex near St. Petersburg, one of Russia's most important cities, setting off massive fires that burned for hours. Another strike in Belgorod knocked out power for 40,000 Russian citizens, plunging entire neighborhoods into darkness. These aren't just military targets on distant battlefields. Ukraine is bringing the war directly into Russian cities, making ordinary Russians feel the consequences of their government's invasion. What makes this strategy particularly devastating is the targeting philosophy behind it. Ukrainian forces aren't randomly selecting facilities to hit. They're identifying critical nodes in Russia's energy network and hammering them relentlessly. When a refinery gets damaged, Ukraine waits just long enough for repair crews to begin work, then strikes again. This approach prevents Russia from ever fully recovering, forcing them to constantly divert resources toward emergency repairs rather than supporting their war effort. Recent developments have made this strategy even more potent. The Trump administration authorized U.S. intelligence agencies to provide Ukraine with targeting data for strikes on Russian energy infrastructure. This means Ukraine now has access to sophisticated reconnaissance information showing exactly where to hit for maximum impact. They know which facilities are most critical, which ones have the least redundancy, and which targets will create cascading failures throughout Russia's energy grid. The authorization covers oil refineries, pipelines, power plants, and storage facilities, giving Ukraine an expansive menu of high-value targets. But here's what makes Putin's situation even more desperate. The energy strikes wouldn't be nearly as devastating if Russia still had the financial cushion they started the war with. To understand why these attacks are landing so hard right now, we need to look at what happened to Putin's carefully prepared war chest. When Russia invaded Ukraine in February 2022, Vladimir Putin wasn't gambling everything on a reckless adventure. He had a plan, and that plan was built on nearly a decade of financial preparation. After annexing Crimea in 2014 and watching Western sanctions damage Russia's economy, Putin decided to build a massive financial reserve specifically designed to support a future war. This became known as Putin's war chest, and by 2022, it contained enough money to make the Russian president feel invincible. The war chest served two calculated purposes. First, it would provide Russia with enough finances to withstand severe Western sanctions for an extended period. Putin knew that invading Ukraine would trigger a much harsher response than Crimea did, so he stockpiled resources accordingly. But the second purpose was even more sinister. Putin planned to use whatever remained of this money after a quick victory to make Russian citizens feel prosperous, creating enthusiasm for additional wars against other former Soviet states like Moldova or the Baltic countries. If Russians felt that war made them richer, they'd support Putin's imperial ambitions without hesitation. The entire strategy hinged on one critical assumption: the war would last between 3 days and 3 weeks. Russian military planners genuinely believed they would capture Kyiv in 72 hours, install a puppet government, and declare victory before the West could organize a meaningful response. In that scenario, the war chest would have been more than sufficient. Russia would have used a fraction of their reserves to fund the invasion, weathered some sanctions, then deployed the surplus into the Russian economy to create an artificial boom that would fuel public support for future conquests. Obviously, nothing went according to plan. 3 years later, Russian forces are still fighting. The war chest has been drained to keep the military operational, and there's no surplus to create prosperity at home. Instead of making Russians feel rich and successful, Putin's financial reserves are being burned just to prevent complete collapse. The head of Russia's largest bank publicly admitted they haven't had a single new infrastructure investment project in an entire year. When your biggest banks are sitting idle because there's no money for development, you're not experiencing real economic growth regardless of what government statistics claim. This reveals the fundamental illusion behind Russia's apparent economic resilience. Russian officials love pointing to GDP growth figures as proof their economy is thriving despite sanctions. But those numbers are meaningless when you understand where the growth is coming from. Russia isn't building new businesses, developing new technologies, or investing in infrastructure that improves lives. The only growth happening is government military spending funded by printing money and depleting savings. Russia is buying tanks, ammunition, and missiles, shipping them to Ukraine, and watching them get destroyed within weeks. That registers as economic activity on paper, but it's actually just converting financial reserves into smoke and scrap metal. Ukraine's energy warfare has exposed Putin's strategic vulnerabilities and accelerated Russia's economic decline. But when you step back and look at the complete picture, the mathematical reality becomes inescapable. Russia has reached a point where collapse isn't a possibility anymore. It's inevitable. Russia has crossed into territory where there are no good options remaining, only varying degrees of catastrophic outcomes.
2022, Russian defense spending was about $50 billion a year. They are now spending close to $150 billion a year on their military.
The economic mathematics have become brutally simple. Russia's defense spending for 2025 accounts for approximately 40% of total government expenditure, exceeding the combined budgets for education, healthcare, social policy, and the national economy. This level of military spending is unsustainable even in wartime, and it becomes completely impossible when the war ends and Russia needs to rebuild depleted arsenals while dealing with inflation that's driving up production costs. The Russian government's own budget projections reveal the depth of the crisis. Officials plan to maintain budget deficits not through economic growth, but through tax increases and expanded borrowing. This admission is staggering because it means Russia's leadership knows they cannot grow their way out of this problem. They're simply trying to delay collapse by squeezing more money from an already struggling population and borrowing against a future that looks increasingly grim. Tax increases during high inflation and economic contraction will drive more people into poverty, create additional labor shortages as citizens flee the country, and potentially spark social unrest that Putin cannot easily control. Putin faces 3 paths forward, and every single one leads to failure. The first option is printing more money to fund continued military operations. This accelerates inflation toward hyperinflation, destroys what remains of the ruble's value, and pushes Russia toward economic conditions similar to Venezuela or Zimbabwe. Russian citizens would watch their savings become worthless, their wages unable to buy basic necessities, and the social contract between government and people would disintegrate. The second option is large-scale conscription to replace the financial incentive system currently recruiting soldiers. But Putin knows this could trigger the kind of mass protests and political instability that threaten his regime directly. Russian mothers whose sons get drafted against their will are not going to stay quiet, and Putin has watched what happens to dictators who lose control of their own populations. The third option is reducing military spending, which means fewer soldiers, less equipment, and ultimately losing the war in Ukraine. Putin has staked his political legitimacy on victory. Admitting defeat would likely cost him power and possibly his life. Ukraine's strategy has forced Putin into this triple bind and then accelerated the timeline on all 3 pressure points simultaneously. Energy strikes reduce Russia's revenue while increasing their costs. Every refinery that burns means less money for military salaries, forcing Putin closer to the conscription decision he wants to avoid. Every power plant that goes offline accelerates inflation as energy prices spike domestically. Every pipeline that gets damaged pushes Russia closer to the spending cuts that would mean military defeat. Ukraine isn't just fighting Russia militarily. They're controlling the clock that determines when Russia's economy collapses, and they're deliberately speeding it up. The endgame is visible now in ways it wasn't earlier in the war. Russia's preparations after Crimea allowed them to sustain operations for years, creating the illusion that they could continue indefinitely. But those preparations are exhausted. The war chest is empty, the inflation is uncontrollable, the energy infrastructure is burning, and Putin has been forced to publicly promise military budget cuts to appease his own population. There are no new reserves to tap, no secret savings accounts to deploy, no financial tricks that haven't already been tried. Russia's path to collapse isn't speculation anymore. The evidence is everywhere, from Putin's unprecedented budget admissions to the burned refineries scattered across Russian territory. Ukraine has identified the exact strategy that breaks Russia's war machine, and they're executing it with precision that's accelerating faster than Putin can respond. The only question now is timing, and with every energy strike, Ukraine controls that timeline more completely. So, what's your take on Ukraine's strategy? Do you think these energy strikes will force Putin to end the war? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and if you found this analysis valuable, smash that like button and subscribe to the channel for more in-depth breakdowns of the war in Ukraine. Until next time, stay informed.